At my baby shower, my wife's mother gifted me a DNA test kit labeled for the real father. Laughter erupted as my wife handed me a trash bag for my things. Her cousin filmed me crying for their family group chat. I smiled, opened my wallet, and said, "Perfect, you'll need this court order for." You know what's funny about betrayal? It's never the knife you see coming that gets you. It's the one wrapped in pink ribbons and handed to you by people who claim to love you. I should have known something was off the moment I pulled into Marjorie's driveway that Saturday afternoon. The woman had more cars parked on her lawn than a used car lot. And let me tell you, my mother-in-law wasn't exactly known for throwing legendary parties unless there was some serious drama brewing underneath all that suburban hospitality. But here I was, clutching a bottle of sparkling cider like some kind of optimistic idiot, thinking this baby shower was actually about celebrating the little girl Claire and I had been dreaming about for months. 3 years of marriage, 2 years of trying, and finally, we were going to be parents. I'd been walking on cloud 9 for weeks, boring everyone at work with ultrasound photos and rambling about cribs and college funds. Hell, I'd even started reading those parenting books that make you question whether you're qualified to keep a houseplant alive, let alone raise a human being. The front door swung open before I could even knock, and there was Marjorie in all her passive-aggressive glory, wearing that smile that never quite reached her eyes. You know the one. The kind that says, "I tolerate you because my daughter insists on keeping you around." She'd perfected that look over the 3 years I'd been part of this family, or at least what I thought was part of this family. "Well, look who finally made it," she chirped, like I was running late instead of arriving exactly on time. "Come on in, honey. Everyone's just dying to see you." The way she said dying should have been my first red flag, but I was too busy trying not to trip over the mountain of pink decorations that had apparently exploded all over her living room. Balloons everywhere, streamers hanging from every possible surface, and enough pink frosting on that cake to paint a small house. It looked like a unicorn had gotten sick all over the place. But hey, I figured that's what you do when you're expecting a daughter, right? That's when I noticed the faces. 20-something people scattered around the room, all of them wearing these weird little smiles that didn't match their eyes. Claire's cousin Derek was there, naturally, standing in the corner with his phone already in his hand like he was expecting something Instagram-worthy to happen. Her Aunt Susan was whispering to someone behind a paper plate, and Gerald, poor, henpecked Gerald, was hiding behind the snack table like he always did when Marjorie was in full social butterfly mode. But it was Claire who really caught my attention. My wife, the woman who'd been glowing with pregnancy hormones for months, was standing there looking like she'd rather be getting a root canal. Her smile was so forced I was surprised her face didn't crack, and she kept glancing at her mother like they were sharing some kind of secret joke. "All right, everyone." Marjorie clapped her hands together like some demented camp counselor. "Time for presents. And we've got a very special one to start us off." She strutted over to me, and I mean strutted, like she was on some twisted runway, carrying this tiny little gift bag that looked way too small to contain anything useful for a baby. The room got quiet in that weird way that makes your skin crawl, like everyone was holding their breath for something. "This one's from all of us," she said, that grin spreading across her face like butter on toast. We all chipped in because we thought it was just so important. I reached into that innocent-looking pink bag, my hand closing around something small and rectangular. For a split second, I thought maybe it was some kind of jewelry for the baby, or maybe a gift card to one of those fancy baby stores. Boy, was I wrong. What I pulled out was a DNA test kit. One of those home paternity tests you can pick up at any pharmacy, complete with instructions and a little plastic tube for spitting into. But that wasn't even the best part. Oh no, they'd gone the extra mile and taped a handwritten note to the front that said, in Marjorie's unmistakable cursive, "For the real father." The room exploded. I'm talking full-on hyena laughter, the kind that makes your ears ring. Someone actually started clapping like I'd just performed some amazing magic trick. Derek's phone was definitely recording now, probably already mentally composing the caption for whatever social media platform he was planning to plaster this humiliation across. And Claire, sweet, pregnant Claire, was laughing so hard she was practically crying. That's when she shoved the black trash bag at me. Not handed, not passed, shoved, like I was some kind of garbage that needed to be taken to the curb. "Take your things," she said. and her voice was so cold it could have frozen hell over. All of them. I stood there for a moment, DNA test in one hand, trash bag in the other, while an entire room full of people who'd eaten my cooking, accepted my Christmas gifts, and smiled at my jokes for 3 years laughed at what they clearly thought was my complete and total destruction. They expected me to break down right there on the spot. Expected me to start crying, maybe beg for forgiveness for whatever crime they'd convinced themselves I'd committed. Expected me to crumble like a stale cookie. But here's the thing about being married to Claire for 3 years and dealing with her family's passive-aggressive bullshit for just as long. You learn to read people. You learn to see the signs when something's brewing beneath the surface. And more importantly, you learn to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. I smiled. Not a broken, defeated smile, but a genuine, almost relieved smile that seemed to suck all the laughter right out of the room. I reached into my wallet, pulled out a folded piece of paper that I'd been carrying around for 2 weeks, and handed it directly to Marjorie. "Perfect," I said, my voice steady as a rock. "You'll need this." The court order was beautiful in its simplicity. Petition to deny grandparental rights. Motion to initiate custody proceedings. Temporary restraining order pending DNA results. All filed, all legal, all ready to go. My lawyer had outdone himself with the language. Professional, thorough, and absolutely devastating to anyone who thought they could publicly humiliate a father and get away with it. Marjorie's face went through about 17 different colors as she read it, finally settling on a shade of green that would have made the Incredible Hulk jealous. The laughter died faster than a cell phone battery, and suddenly everyone was very interested in their shoes. I walked out of that house without saying another word, leaving behind a room full of people who'd just realized that the punchline they'd been setting up for weeks had somehow turned into their own joke. And as I drove away, I couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, this was going to be the best thing that ever happened to me and my daughter. You want to know the real kicker about that whole baby shower disaster? It wasn't some sudden betrayal that came out of nowhere like a surprise slap to the face. Oh no, that would have been too easy, too clean. The truth is, I'd been getting slow roasted by Claire's family for 3 solid years, and I was just too damn optimistic, or maybe too damn stupid, to see it for what it really was. Let me paint you a picture of what Sunday dinners were like at the Richardson household, because that's where this whole nightmare really started brewing. Picture this, a perfectly manicured suburban home where everything matches, from the throw pillows to the seasonal wreaths that Marjorie changes out like clockwork. The kind of place where you're afraid to sit on the white couch because you might leave an imprint, and where the artificial flowers look more alive than the actual people living there. Marjorie would greet me at the door with that plastic smile of hers, the one that screamed, "I'm being polite because I have to be, not because I want to be." She'd look me up and down like I was a stray dog that had wandered onto her pristine property, taking in my off-the-rack shirt, my department store shoes, my haircut that didn't cost more than my monthly car payment. "Oh, hello there," she'd say, like she was surprised to see me even though Claire had been bringing me to these torture sessions for months. "How nice of you to join us again." The emphasis on nice always made it sound like I was some kind of charity case they were graciously allowing into their perfect little circle. But hey, I was young and in love and convinced that eventually, they'd warm up to me once they got to know the real me. What a joke that turned out to be. Gerald, bless his heart, was about as useful as a chocolate teapot when it came to standing up to his wife. The man had been browbeaten into submission so thoroughly that I'm pretty sure he asked permission to use the bathroom in his own house. He'd shake my hand with this apologetic look in his eyes, like he wanted to warn me about what was coming but didn't have the backbone to actually do it. "Good to see you, son," he'd mutter, and I could tell he meant it, but his voice carried about as much authority as a wet paper towel. Poor guy had been married to Hurricane Marjorie for 30-something years, and it showed in every defeated line of his face. The dinner table was where things really got fun, and by fun, I mean soul-crushingly awkward. Marjorie had this talent for making innocent conversation feel like a cross-examination. She'd ask about my job. I worked in IT support for a mid-sized company, nothing glamorous but steady and decent paying, and somehow make it sound like I was collecting unemployment and living in a cardboard box. "Oh, you're still doing the computer thing," she'd say, waving her hand dismissively like technology was some kind of mysterious voodoo that only peasants dabbled in. That must be interesting. Do you think you'll ever want to do something more substantial? Substantial. Like my job helping people solve their problems and keeping their systems running wasn't substantial enough for Princess Marjorie and her delusions of grandeur. Never mind that I was pulling in a solid middle-class salary and had excellent benefits. Never mind that I was working my way up in the company and had already gotten 2 promotions. None of that mattered because it wasn't flashy enough for their suburban royalty standards. And don't even get me started on the food commentary. I'd bring a dish to contribute. You know, like a decent human being does when they're invited to someone's home for dinner, and Marjorie would examine it like it might contain anthrax. Oh, how creative, she'd say, holding my homemade lasagna like it might explode. Store-bought sauce, I assume? Well, that's certainly practical. Meanwhile, she'd be serving some elaborate meal that probably took her 3 days to prepare, complete with garnishes that cost more than my grocery budget for a week. Everything had to be perfect, everything had to be Instagram-worthy, and everything had to make the rest of us feel like we weren't measuring up to her impossibly high standards. But the real masterpiece was how she'd managed to work in little digs about my background, my education, my family. See, I didn't come from money. My parents were good, hardworking people who taught me values like honesty, loyalty, and treating people with respect regardless of their bank account balance. But to Marjorie, that just meant I was common folk who didn't understand the finer things in life. Oh, your mother works at the post office? How quaint. I'm sure that's very fulfilling for her. The way she said quaint made it sound like my mom was some kind of medieval peasant instead of a dedicated public servant who'd been keeping that place running smoothly for 20 years. And Claire? My beloved wife who was supposed to have my back, who'd promised to love and support me through thick and thin. She'd just sit there, occasionally jumping in with a weak, "Mom, come on," that carried all the conviction of a wet paper towel. At first, I thought she was just trying to keep the peace, avoiding family drama by not taking sides. But as the months turned into years, I started to realize something that made my stomach turn. She wasn't staying neutral. She was choosing sides, and it wasn't mine. The real turning point came around month 18 of our marriage, during one of those delightful Sunday dinners from hell. Marjorie was going on about some charity function she was organizing, making it sound like she was personally ending world hunger instead of planning an overpriced lunch for bored housewives. Of course, we only invite people of a certain caliber to these events, she said, glancing at me like I was Exhibit A of what didn't make the cut. It's important to maintain standards, you understand. We can't just let anyone participate. I'd finally had enough. What kind of standards are we talking about here, Marjorie? Because if you're looking for people who work hard, pay their taxes, and actually contribute to society instead of just writing checks to make themselves feel important, I'd say I qualify just fine. The table went dead silent. Gerald looked like he wanted to crawl under his chair and disappear. Claire's eyes went wide with horror, but not at her mother's constant disrespect, at me for finally standing up to it. I was just saying, Marjorie started, but I wasn't done. You were just saying that I'm not good enough for your daughter or your family, which is something you've been making crystal clear since the day we met. The only question is why Claire keeps bringing me around if you all think I'm such a disappointment. That's when Claire finally spoke up, and what she said still makes my blood boil when I think about it. Can't you just try to get along? This is important to me, and you're making it harder than it needs to be. Making it harder. Like I was the problem. Like I was the one creating tension by having the audacity to exist in their perfect little world. That night, driving home in complete silence, I realized that I wasn't fighting for acceptance from Claire's family. I was fighting a war I'd already lost before I even knew it had started. But here's what really gets me. I kept trying. Like some kind of masochist, I kept showing up to those dinners, kept bringing gifts for birthdays and holidays, kept pretending that maybe this time would be different. When Claire got pregnant, I actually thought it would change everything. I thought having their grandchild would finally make them see me as family instead of some unwanted hitchhiker who'd attached himself to their precious daughter. Derek, Claire's cousin, was another piece of work entirely. This guy was like Marjorie's apprentice in the art of passive-aggressive warfare. He'd sidle up to me at family gatherings with this smirk that made me want to rearrange his face, always ready with some joke that wasn't really a joke. "Hey, heard you got another promotion at work," he'd say, making it sound like I'd won the lottery for special needs kids. Must be nice having such low expectations to live up to. Or my personal favorite, Claire's looking great these days. Pregnancy really agrees with her. Good thing she's got those strong Richardson genes to pass on, right? The implication was always the same. I was the weak link, the genetic dilution in their perfect bloodline, the participation trophy husband who'd somehow tricked their precious Claire into settling for less than she deserved. And through it all, Claire kept making excuses for them. That's just how mom is. Derek doesn't mean anything by it. They'll warm up to you eventually. Eventually became the cruelest word in the English language, a carrot dangling just out of reach while I got beaten down by 1,000 tiny cuts disguised as family bonding. By the time that baby shower rolled around, I'd spent 3 years being treated like an unwelcome guest in what was supposed to be my own family. 3 years of being reminded that I wasn't good enough, smart enough, successful enough, or classy enough for their standards. 3 years of watching my wife choose her family's comfort over my dignity, again and again and again. So when they handed me that DNA test kit with those fake smiles and genuine laughter, it wasn't really a surprise. It was just the grand finale of a 3-year campaign to make me understand exactly where I stood in their pecking order. The only surprise was that I was finally ready to show them exactly what I thought of their opinion. You know what they say about curiosity killing the cat? Well, sometimes that dead cat comes back to life just to give you the ammunition you need to burn down an entire kingdom of lies. 2 weeks before that baby shower from hell, I stumbled across something that changed everything, and I mean everything, about how I saw my marriage, my in-laws, and my own future. It was a Tuesday night, one of those mind-numbing weekday evenings where Claire was sprawled on the couch watching some reality TV garbage about housewives throwing wine at each other. I was in the kitchen, doing what I always did, cleaning up after dinner, loading the dishwasher, basically being the domestic god I'd somehow become in our little household. Claire's pregnancy had turned her into this delicate flower who couldn't be expected to lift a finger, which I was honestly fine with. Hell, I was excited about it. My wife was carrying our daughter, and if that meant I had to handle a few extra chores, so be it. That's when I heard the buzzing. Not once, not twice, but this constant stream of notifications coming from Claire's iPad, which was sitting on the kitchen counter charging. Now, normally, I'm not the type of guy who goes snooping through his wife's devices. I've got trust issues like anyone else, but I'd never been the jealous, paranoid husband who needs to monitor every text message and social media interaction. Maybe I should have been. The buzzing kept going. Buzz, 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 like a dying bee trapped in a jar. It was driving me absolutely insane, especially since Claire seemed completely oblivious to it from her position on the couch. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Hey babe, your tablet's going crazy over here," I called out, drying my hands on a dish towel. "Just ignore it," she called back, not even looking away from whatever train wreck was happening on her show. Probably just mom sending more baby stuff. But as I walked past the counter, a notification flashed across the lock screen that made me stop dead in my tracks. The chat was labeled "The Real Family," and the preview text made my blood freeze in my veins. He's gonna lose it when he sees the DNA kit. Face with tears of joy, face with tears of joy, face with tears of joy. The Real Family. Let that sink in for a minute. Not Richardson Family Group, or baby shower planning, or anything normal that a pregnant woman might be discussing with her relatives. The Real Family. Like I wasn't part of the real family. Like I was some kind of imposter who'd infiltrated their precious bloodline. I stood there for what felt like an hour, but was probably only about 30 seconds, staring at that notification like it might change if I looked at it long enough. My hands started shaking. Actually shaking, like I was some kind of scared kid instead of a grown man who pays taxes and changes his own oil. "Everything okay in there?" Claire called out, and her voice sounded different now. Guilty, maybe? Or was I just paranoid? "Yeah, all good," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Here's the thing about moments like this. You know you're about to cross a line that you can't uncross. You know that whatever you're about to discover is going to change everything. And there's this split second where you can choose to walk away, to preserve whatever innocence you have left, to keep living in blissful ignorance. But once you see that notification, once you know there's something called the real family that apparently doesn't include you, there's no going back. I picked up that iPad with hands that felt like they belonged to someone else. The screen was still unlocked. Claire never was great with password security. And there it was, staring me in the face like a neon sign advertising my own destruction. The Real Family Group chat. 11 members. Marjorie, Gerald, Derek, Claire, and a bunch of other Richardson clan members whose names I recognized from Christmas cards and awkward family photos. Everyone except me. The guy who'd been married to one of them for 3 years. The guy who was about to become the father of what should have been their granddaughter, niece, and cousin. I scrolled up, my thumb moving like it was on autopilot. And what I found was 3 months of messages that read like a manual on how to systematically destroy someone's life while making them think you're just planning a baby shower. Marjorie had started the whole thing, naturally. I think it's time we addressed the elephant in the room, she'd written back in early February. That baby doesn't look anything like Claire in the ultrasound photos, and we all know how social she was before settling down with him. Social. That was their polite way of saying slutty, I guess. Real classy stuff from the woman who'd spent 3 years lecturing me about having proper manners. Derek had jumped in immediately, because of course he did. I've been saying this for months. Dude's too trusting. Probably never even occurred to him to ask questions. Too trusting. Like trust was some kind of character defect instead of the foundation of a healthy marriage. Like being a devoted husband was something to be laughed at instead of respected. But it was Claire's messages that really twisted the knife. My pregnant wife, the woman who'd been glowing about our future together, planning nursery colors and picking out baby names, had been right there in the thick of it, laughing along with the rest of them. He's going to cry, she'd typed, and I could practically hear her giggling as she wrote it. Remember how emotional he got during that commercial with the soldiers coming home? He's such a sap. Such a sap. For crying during a commercial about military families reuniting. For having emotions and not being ashamed of them. For being the kind of guy who tears up at touching moments instead of turning into some kind of stone-faced robot. The thread went on for pages. Marjorie suggesting the DNA kit. I saw them at CVS. Perfect. Derek volunteering to film the whole thing. This is going to be legendary. I'll make sure to get his face when he realizes. Other family members chiming in with suggestions about how to maximize my humiliation. Make sure there's a big crowd, someone had suggested. The more people watching, the better. Should we invite his family too? Another had asked. No, this is Richardson family business, Marjorie had replied. Let him call his people to cry about it afterward. Richardson family business. Like destroying someone's life was just another item on their social calendar, somewhere between book club and getting their nails done. But the worst part, the part that made me physically nauseous, was how they talked about my daughter. Their granddaughter, their niece, their cousin. This innocent little girl who hadn't even been born yet, and they were already planning to use her as a weapon against me. Once we prove he's not the father, we can make sure she grows up knowing the truth about him, Marjorie had written. Children deserve to know when adults have lied to them. The truth about me. Like I was some kind of monster instead of a guy who'd been working overtime to save money for college funds and baby furniture. Like I was a predator instead of someone who'd spent hours researching car seats and reading parenting books and practicing diaper changes on a stuffed animal. I screenshotted everything. Every single message, every cruel joke, every planning detail for what they clearly saw as the highlight of their year. My thumb moved automatically, capturing evidence of a betrayal so complete and calculated that it would have impressed Machiavelli himself. Then I emailed everything to myself, because I've seen enough movies to know that evidence has a way of disappearing when it's inconvenient for the bad guys. After that, I sat down at the kitchen table and just stared at my phone, trying to process what I'd just learned. My wife was planning to humiliate me in front of a room full of people. My mother-in-law had orchestrated the whole thing like some kind of twisted theater director. My extended family, the people I'd been buying Christmas presents for and making small talk with at barbecues, had spent months plotting my destruction while smiling to my face. That's when I called Marcus, Claire's brother-in-law, married to her sister Jenny, and the only person in that entire family who'd ever treated me like an actual human being instead of some kind of charity case they were stuck with. Marcus was a straight shooter, a mechanic who worked with his hands and said what he meant without hiding it behind layers of suburban passive aggression. Dude, you sound like hell, he said when he picked up. What's wrong? I told him everything. read him some of the messages verbatim, explained about the DNA kit and the filming and the whole elaborate plan they'd cooked up for my public execution. Marcus was quiet for a long time after I finished. Finally, he said, "Jesus Christ, man. I knew Marjorie was a piece of work, but this is next-level evil. What are you going to do?" "I don't know," I admitted, because I really didn't. "I feel like I'm living in some kind of nightmare." "Listen to me," Marcus said, and his voice was dead serious. "These people aren't your family. They never were, and they never will be. They see you as entertainment, not as a person. You need to protect yourself and that baby, because they sure as hell aren't going to." That night, after Claire fell asleep next to me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and planning my next move. I opened a new bank account the next morning, transferred half our savings into it, and called a lawyer by lunchtime. If they wanted to play games, if they thought they could treat me like their personal punching bag, they were about to learn that even the nicest guy in the world has a breaking point. And brother, they'd found mine. Walking into that baby shower knowing what I knew was like being a gladiator entering the Colosseum, except instead of lions, I was facing a bunch of suburban vultures dressed in pastels and armed with fake smiles. The difference was, this gladiator had been preparing for battle while they thought they were herding a lamb to slaughter. I'd spent 2 weeks since discovering the Real Family group chat getting my ducks in a row. Bank account opened and secured, lawyer consulted and documents prepared, evidence compiled and stored in multiple locations. I'd even practiced my poker face in the bathroom mirror, which probably makes me sound like a complete psychopath, but desperate times call for desperate measures. The morning of the shower, Claire was practically bouncing off the walls with excitement. She spent an hour getting ready, trying on 3 different maternity dresses before settling on some flowery number that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. She was humming while she did her makeup, actually humming like she was getting ready for a nice family gathering instead of a public execution. "You seem happy," I said, watching her apply lipstick with the precision of a surgeon. "I just love family events," she replied, meeting my eyes in the mirror. "Don't you?" The audacity was breathtaking. This woman had spent months planning my humiliation, and she was asking me if I loved family events. It took every ounce of self-control I had not to laugh in her face right then and there. "Oh, I'm sure today will be unforgettable," I said, and I meant every word. When we pulled into Marjorie's driveway, I could see the stage was perfectly set. Cars everywhere, balloons tied to the mailbox, and through the front window, I could make out a crowd of people who were probably already rehearsing their surprised gasps and fake concern for when the show started. Claire grabbed my hand as we walked to the door, and for just a second, I almost felt bad about what was coming. But then I remembered those messages, remembered her laughing about how I was going to cry, and that moment of weakness passed like a bad case of gas. Marjorie opened the door before we could knock, and her performance was Academy Award-worthy. Big smile, warm hug for Claire, slightly less warm, but still fake-friendly greeting for me. She was wearing this pink dress that made her look like an overgrown baby, which was fitting considering how she was acting. Come in, come in. Everyone's so excited to see you both." The living room was packed with faces I recognized from years of awkward family gatherings. Derek was there, of course, phone already in his hand, and that smirk plastered across his face like he was watching his favorite movie. Gerald was hiding behind the refreshment table like always, looking like he'd rather be getting a colonoscopy than dealing with whatever his wife had planned. But it was the energy in the room that really gave them away. Everyone was just a little too excited, a little too focused on me, like they were all sharing this delicious secret that they couldn't wait to reveal. The anticipation was practically crackling in the air like static electricity before a thunderstorm. I played my part perfectly, smiled at everyone, accepted their congratulations on the upcoming birth, made small talk about cribs and college funds, and all the other boring dad stuff that people expect you to be excited about. Meanwhile, I was counting heads and memorizing faces, making mental notes about who was here to witness what they thought would be my complete breakdown. "All right, everyone," Marjorie finally called out, clapping her hands together like she was calling a bunch of kindergartners to attention. "Time for presents. And we've got a very special one to start us off. Here we go, I thought. Showtime." The crowd gathered around in a perfect circle, phones coming out left and right, because apparently everyone wanted their own personal copy of my destruction. Derek positioned himself front and center, his camera already rolling, probably already planning which social media platforms he was going to share this on. Marjorie approached me with that tiny gift bag, and I swear she was practically glowing with anticipation. This was her moment, the culmination of months of planning and scheming, and she was savoring every second of it. "This one's from all of us," she said, and her grin was so wide it looked like her face might split in half. We all chipped in because we thought it was just so important. I reached into the bag with steady hands, even though my heart was pounding like a jackhammer. When my fingers closed around that DNA test kit, I felt this weird sense of relief. After 2 weeks of wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing, if maybe I'd misunderstood their intentions, here was proof positive that these people were exactly as cruel as I'd thought. The note taped to the front was written in Marjorie's perfect cursive for the real father. Real subtle, Marjorie. Real classy. The room erupted exactly like I'd expected. Laughter, applause, someone actually whistled like I'd just performed a magic trick. Derek's camera was capturing every angle, probably already mentally composing the caption, "When keeping it real goes wrong," or some other internet garbage. And Claire, my wife, my partner, the woman who was carrying what was supposed to be our daughter, was right there in the front row, laughing harder than anyone. Her face was flushed with excitement, and she looked happier than I'd seen her in months. That's when she shoved the trash bag at me. Not handed, not offered. Shoved, like I was some kind of garbage that needed to be taken out to the curb. "Take your things," she said, and her voice was ice cold. All of them. The room was watching me like I was some kind of reality TV show, waiting for the breakdown, the tears, the begging. They wanted to see me crumble, wanted to watch me realize that I'd been living a lie, that I wasn't really part of their perfect family, that I never had been. Instead, I smiled. A genuine, almost relieved smile that seemed to suck all the laughter right out of the room like someone had pulled the plug on their party. "Perfect," I said, my voice calm and steady. "You'll need this." I reached into my wallet and pulled out the folded court order that had been burning a hole in my pocket for 2 weeks. The paper felt almost warm in my hands as I extended it toward Marjorie, whose grin was already starting to falter around the edges. The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop in that room, which was quite a change from the raucous laughter of 30 seconds earlier. Marjorie unfolded the papers with hands that were suddenly not quite as steady as they'd been when she was handing me that gift bag. I watched her face change as she read. Confusion, then understanding, then something that looked like pure panic as the reality of what she was holding sank in. Petition to deny grandparental rights. Motion to initiate custody proceedings. Temporary restraining order pending DNA results. All official, all legal, all ready to turn their little joke into a courtroom nightmare. "What is this?" she whispered, but I could tell she knew exactly what it was. That's what happens when you try to publicly humiliate someone who's been preparing for this exact moment, I said, looking around the room at all those shocked faces. "Did you really think I was stupid enough not to see this coming?" Claire had gone pale, the trash bag hanging limply from her hands like a deflated balloon. Derek's phone was still recording, but now he looked like he wasn't sure if he wanted to keep the footage or delete it before it could be used against them in court. I turned to address the room. These people who'd been laughing at me 30 seconds earlier. "For anyone who's wondering, I've known about your little group chat for 2 weeks. Screenshots, timestamps, the whole thing. My lawyer found it very interesting reading. The color drained out of faces like someone had opened a valve. Suddenly, nobody was looking at me anymore. Suddenly, everyone was very interested in their shoes, or the ceiling, or anywhere else that wasn't my face. I walked out of that house without another word, leaving behind a room full of people who'd just realized that their punchline had somehow become their own punchline. And as I drove away, I couldn't help but think that revenge really was a dish best served cold. Ice cold, with legal documents and a side of public humiliation. You know what's funny about dropping a legal bomb on people who think they're untouchable? The aftermath is like watching a slow-motion car crash where everyone involved keeps making the situation worse for themselves while you sit back with popcorn and watch the show. The 3 weeks following my dramatic exit from that baby shower were like Christmas morning, 4th of July, and my birthday all rolled into one spectacular display of karma finally showing up to work. The first sign that my little courtroom surprise had hit its target came exactly 18 hours after I walked out of Marjorie's house. My phone started buzzing at 6:47 a.m. with a call from Claire, which I let go straight to voicemail because I was enjoying my first peaceful cup of coffee in months. The voicemail she left was a masterpiece of panic disguised as righteous indignation. "You can't be serious with this legal nonsense." Her recorded voice squeaked through my speaker. "This is our family, our business, and you're being completely ridiculous. Call me back so we can talk about this like adults." Like adults. This from the woman who'd spent months planning to humiliate me with a DNA test kit at a baby shower. I saved that voicemail like it was a fine wine, something to savor when I needed a reminder of just how delusional these people really were. But Claire's panic call was just the opening act. Over the next few days, my phone became a hotline for Richardson Family Damage Control. Gerald called, speaking in hushed tones like he was afraid Marjorie might overhear him breathing too loudly. "Son, I think there might be some misunderstanding here," he said, and I could practically hear him sweating through the phone. "Maybe we could all sit down and work this out without involving the courts." Derek tried a different approach, going for the buddy-buddy routine like we'd been best friends instead of him spending 3 years treating me like his personal entertainment. "Dude, come on, it was just a joke. Nobody meant anything serious by it. You know how family is, right? Just a joke. 3 months of planning, a coordinated public humiliation campaign, and conspiracy to destroy my relationship with my unborn daughter. And it was just a joke." I guess my sense of humor was broken, because I wasn't laughing. But the real comedy gold came from Marjorie herself, who apparently decided that the best defense was a good offense. She left me a voicemail that was so unhinged it could have been performance art. "I don't know who you think you are, threatening this family with your legal papers," she started, and I could hear the fury building in her voice like steam in a pressure cooker. "We've been nothing but welcoming to you, and this is how you repay our kindness? By trying to keep us from our own granddaughter? You're going to regret this, young man. Mark my words. Our granddaughter. The same granddaughter they've been planning to use as ammunition against me for months. The same granddaughter they'd been joking about in their group chat, making plans about how to poison her against me once they proved I wasn't her father. But now that their little scheme had backfired, suddenly they were concerned grandparents being kept from their beloved family member. I saved that voicemail too, right next to all the screenshots from their group chat. My lawyer was going to love adding it to our evidence file. Then came the birth. 3 weeks and 2 days after the baby shower disaster. I got the call at 2:30 in the morning. Claire had gone into labor, and despite everything that had happened between us, despite the legal papers and the accusations, and the complete breakdown of our marriage, I still rushed to that hospital like my hair was on fire. Because here's the thing that all those manipulative jackasses in her family never understood. This wasn't about them. This wasn't about their hurt feelings, or their wounded pride, or their shock that someone had finally stood up to their bullying. This was about my daughter, the little girl I'd been dreaming about for months, and I wasn't going to let their petty drama keep me from being there when she came into this world. The hospital was like a war zone of awkward tension. I arrived to find the entire Richardson clan camped out in the waiting room like they were claiming territory. Marjorie shot me a look that could have frozen hell over, while Derek pretended to be deeply absorbed in some magazine about celebrity divorces. Gerald just looked tired, like he'd aged 10 years in 3 weeks. But when the nurse came out and told me I had a daughter, healthy and beautiful and perfect in every way, none of that other garbage mattered anymore. I held that tiny little person in my arms, looked into eyes that were unmistakably mine, and felt something shift inside my chest that I can't even put into words. She was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a little button nose, and this expression on her face like she was already judging the world and finding it somewhat lacking. She looked exactly like the baby photos my mom had kept of me, which would have been hilarious if it weren't for the fact that Claire and her family had spent months convinced I wasn't the father. That's when I discovered Claire's first real power move in this whole mess. When the nurse asked about the birth certificate, Claire looked me dead in the eye and said, "I'm not listing a father right now. We'll sort that out later." Later. Like my paternity was still some kind of open question that needed to be resolved by committee. Like the DNA test they'd been so eager to give me at the baby shower wasn't going to prove exactly what I already knew. That this little girl was mine, 100%, no questions asked. But here's where Claire's plan started showing its cracks. See, she thought she was being clever, thought she was maintaining some kind of leverage over me by keeping me off that birth certificate. What she didn't realize was that she just handed me even more ammunition for court. Denying a father his legal recognition of his child isn't just petty. It's legally problematic, especially when you've got documented evidence that the denial is based on a coordinated harassment campaign. While I was dealing with the legal implications of Claire's birth certificate games, Marjorie was busy launching what can only be described as a character assassination campaign that would have made Joseph McCarthy proud. Within days of my daughter's birth, I started hearing from friends, co-workers, and acquaintances who'd been contacted by various members of the Richardson family. The story they were spreading was a masterpiece of creative fiction. According to their version of events, I was an unstable, controlling husband who'd abandoned my pregnant wife and was now using the court system to harass an innocent family. They painted themselves as the victims, just trying to protect Claire and the baby from my erratic behavior. Marjorie, apparently, had taken her show on the road to their church, where she tearfully told the congregation about how I'd walked out on Claire during her pregnancy. She conveniently left out the part about the DNA test kit, the group chat, and the months of planning my public humiliation. In her version, I was just a deadbeat dad who couldn't handle the responsibility of fatherhood. Derek, meanwhile, had taken to social media like a fish to water. He started posting these vague but pointed messages about fake fathers and men who abandon their responsibilities. He shared articles about deadbeat dads and the importance of family loyalty, always with these little comments that made it clear he was talking about someone specific. Some people just can't handle real commitment, he posted one day, along with a link to an article about men who leave their families. Good thing children are resilient and can overcome having toxic people removed from their lives. Toxic people. This from a guy who'd spent months plotting to film my public breakdown for his personal entertainment. But the worst part wasn't the lies they were telling about me. It was watching people I thought were friends start to distance themselves. Some of them came right out and asked if the rumors were true, which I appreciated because at least they were giving me a chance to defend myself. But others just started acting weird around me, like they weren't sure what to believe but didn't want to take any chances. My coworker Janet, who'd been excited about my becoming a father and had even thrown me a little office celebration when Claire got pregnant, suddenly got very quiet whenever I mentioned the baby. My neighbor Bob, who'd been helping me install a car seat in my car just weeks earlier, started giving me these weird looks when we passed each other in the driveway. It was like watching my entire social network get infected with doubt, one person at a time. Even when I tried to explain what had really happened, some people just couldn't wrap their heads around the idea that a family would orchestrate something so cruel and calculated. It was easier for them to believe that I was having some kind of breakdown than to accept that suburban families could be capable of that level of manipulation. But through it all, through the rumors and the whispers and the sideways glances, I had one thing that kept me grounded. That tiny photo the hospital had given me of my daughter. Every time I looked at her face, every time I saw those unmistakable features that proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that she was mine, I remembered what I was fighting for. This wasn't about winning some petty argument with Claire's family. This wasn't about getting revenge for months of disrespect and manipulation. This was about making sure my daughter grew up knowing that her father had fought for her, that he'd refused to be bullied or intimidated or driven away by people who thought they could control everyone around them through fear and social pressure. The silence from Claire herself was almost worse than the active hostility from the rest of her family. After that first panicked phone call, she'd gone completely radio silent. No calls, no texts, no attempts to communicate about our daughter or our future or anything else. It was like I'd ceased to exist in her world, except as a legal problem that needed to be managed. But silence, I was learning, could be its own kind of weapon. Every day that passed without her reaching out, every week that went by without any attempt to include me in our daughter's life, was more evidence for my lawyer to add to our growing file. You can't claim someone is an unfit father while simultaneously refusing to let them be a father at all. 3 weeks after my daughter was born, I was sitting in my lawyer's office, looking at a stack of documents that would change everything. Paternity test results that proved what we all already knew. Screenshots of the group chat that showed premeditation. Hospital records that documented Claire's refusal to list me as the father. And a timeline of harassment that painted a very clear picture of a family that had planned and executed a campaign designed to destroy my relationship with my child. "This is actually better than I expected," my lawyer said, flipping through the evidence file. "They've made so many mistakes, I'm not sure where to start." That's when I realized something that made me smile for the first time in weeks. In their arrogance, in their absolute certainty that they could humiliate me and get away with it, the Richardson family had handed me everything I needed to not just defend myself, but to go on the offensive. The game was about to change, and this time, I was holding all the cards. There's something almost poetic about watching entitled people realize that their money, their connections, and their suburban kingdom can't protect them from the one place where facts actually matter: a courtroom. The first custody hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in early November, and I'd been counting down the days like a kid waiting for Christmas, except instead of presents under a tree, I was expecting to unwrap 3 months of documented evidence that would hopefully blow up the Richardson family's little fantasy world. I showed up to that courthouse at 8:30 a.m. sharp, wearing my best suit, which admittedly wasn't saying much since my wardrobe consisted mainly of business casual and weekend dad clothes. But I cleaned up pretty well. My lawyer, Sarah Martinez, was this no-nonsense woman in her 40s who'd built a reputation for eating alive entitled suburbanites who thought they could manipulate the legal system. When I'd first consulted with her, she'd looked at my evidence file and actually smiled, which I took as a good sign. Most of my clients come to me with he said, she said situations, she told me during our prep meeting. "You've basically handed me a paint-by-numbers case." These people documented their own conspiracy. The courthouse was one of those imposing government buildings that makes you feel like you're about to be judged by the gods themselves. All marble and echoing hallways and stern-faced bailiffs who look like they've seen every kind of human drama imaginable and weren't impressed by any of it. But as intimidating as the building was, I felt more confident walking through those doors than I had in months. I spotted the Richardson clan from about 50 yards away, clustered together near the courtroom entrance like they were planning a hostile takeover instead of attending a custody hearing. Claire was there, of course, wearing some expensive-looking dress that probably cost more than I made in a week. She'd lost most of the pregnancy weight already and looked like she'd stepped out of one of those glossy magazines that make regular people feel inadequate about their lives. Marjorie was in full battle gear, a power suit that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager," and enough jewelry to stock a small boutique. She was gesturing animatedly at what I assumed was their lawyer, some slick-looking guy in a suit that probably cost more than my car. Gerald stood slightly apart from the group, looking like he'd rather be getting a root canal without anesthesia. Derek was there too, naturally, because apparently he had nothing better to do with his life than insert himself into other people's legal drama. He was playing with his phone, probably updating his social media followers about how they were going to destroy me in court. The whole group had this air of casual confidence, like they were about to watch a movie where they knew how it ended. When they spotted me walking toward the courtroom with Sarah, their casual chatter stopped like someone had hit a mute button. Marjorie's face went through about 17 different expressions before settling on what I can only describe as barely contained rage. Claire wouldn't even look at me, suddenly finding the courthouse floor fascinating. "That's them?" Sarah asked quietly, and when I nodded, she actually chuckled. "They look exactly like I expected. This is going to be fun." The courtroom itself was smaller than I'd anticipated, more like a really formal conference room than the dramatic TV courtroom I'd been picturing. Judge Williams was a woman in her 60s with gray hair and the kind of no-nonsense expression that suggested she'd heard every sob story, excuse, and manipulation tactic in the book and wasn't buying any of it. We all filed in like we were attending some twisted family reunion. The Richardson family took up the entire left side of the courtroom, while I sat with Sarah on the right. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. It really was us versus them, and the battle lines couldn't have been clearer. Claire's lawyer went first, and his opening statement was a masterclass in creative storytelling. According to his version of events, I was an unstable husband who'd abandoned his pregnant wife during a minor family disagreement. He painted Claire as this tragic figure, a young mother just trying to protect her child from a father who'd shown concerning patterns of behavior. "Your Honor," he said in this smooth voice that probably impressed suburban juries, "my client is simply asking for the court's protection. Mr. Thompson has demonstrated erratic behavior, including making unfounded accusations against her family and filing frivolous legal actions designed to harass and intimidate. Frivolous legal actions. Unfounded accusations. This guy was good. I had to give him credit. If I didn't know the truth, I might have been convinced that I was the villain in this story. But then it was Sarah's turn, and watching her work was like watching a master surgeon perform an operation. She started slow, methodical, building her case piece by piece like she was constructing a fortress that nobody could tear down. Your Honor, the defendant would have you believe this case is about a father abandoning his family. The evidence will show that this case is actually about a family systematically harassing and attempting to humiliate a devoted husband and father-to-be. She pulled out the first exhibit, printed screenshots of the group chat messages. Even from where I was sitting, I could see Claire's face go pale as Sarah began reading excerpts aloud. He's gonna lose it when he sees the DNA kit, Sarah read in a flat, professional tone that somehow made the words sound even more damning. He's such a sap. Remember how emotional he got during that commercial? This is going to be legendary. Judge Williams' expression didn't change, but I caught her eyebrows raising slightly as Sarah continued reading message after message, documenting months of planning and coordination. The prosecutor in me wanted to cheer, but I kept my poker face intact. These messages, Your Honor, span a period of 3 months and involve 11 members of the defendant's family. This was not a spontaneous prank or a minor family disagreement. This was a calculated campaign of psychological warfare against a man whose only crime was marrying into their family. Then came the video evidence. Derek's masterpiece, the footage he'd taken at the baby shower, thinking he was capturing my breakdown for posterity. Instead, he documented the exact moment when their carefully planned ambush backfired spectacularly. Watching it again on the courtroom's television monitor was surreal. There I was, pulling that DNA test kit out of the pink gift bag, while a room full of people laughed like hyenas. There was Claire, shoving the trash bag at me with that cold smile. And there was my moment of triumph, handing Marjorie the court order while their laughter died, like someone had pulled the plug on their party. As you can see, Your Honor, Sarah continued, Mr. Thompson did not abandon his family. He was publicly humiliated by his family, who had spent months planning this exact scenario. The defendant's claim that this was a minor disagreement is contradicted by their own evidence. Judge Williams was taking notes now, which I hoped was a good sign. Her expression was still neutral, but I could tell she was paying attention to every detail. That's when Sarah brought out the big guns. Witness statements from my coworkers, friends, and neighbors who could testify to my character and my excitement about becoming a father. People who'd seen me researching car seats and baby-proofing products, who'd listened to me talk about college funds and parenting classes. Mr. Thompson's behavior throughout his wife's pregnancy was consistent with that of an excited, devoted father-to-be, Sarah explained. He attended every doctor's appointment he was allowed to attend, purchased baby furniture and supplies, and spoke constantly about his anticipation of his daughter's birth. This is not the behavior of a man planning to abandon his family. But the real knockout punch came when Sarah presented the timeline of events following the baby shower. Claire's refusal to list me on the birth certificate. The rumors spread by Marjorie at their church. Derek's social media campaign. The coordinated effort to paint me as an unstable, deadbeat father while simultaneously denying me any contact with my daughter. The defendant claims to be protecting her child, Sarah said, her voice rising slightly with controlled indignation. But protection from what? From a father who has never shown anything but love and commitment? The only danger to this child comes from being raised in an environment where family members coordinate psychological attacks against people they claim to love. Judge Williams finally spoke up, and her voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. Counselor, are you suggesting that the defendant and her family engaged in a conspiracy to alienate Mr. Thompson from his child? I'm not suggesting it, Your Honor. I'm stating it as fact, supported by their own documented communications and actions. That's when Claire's lawyer made a critical mistake. He objected, claiming that the group chat messages were taken out of context and that the baby shower incident was just a family tradition of good-natured ribbing. Good-natured ribbing. Judge Williams looked at him like he'd just suggested that waterboarding was a spa treatment. Counselor, she said slowly, are you seriously arguing that publicly questioning a man's paternity and filming his reaction constitutes good-natured ribbing? Your Honor, families often engage in spirited interactions. Sir, Judge Williams' voice could have frozen nitrogen. I've been presiding over family court for 15 years. I've seen every kind of dysfunction, every type of family conflict, and every possible excuse for bad behavior. What I've seen documented here is not spirited family interaction. This is abuse. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Abuse. Not a prank, not a misunderstanding, not good-natured ribbing. Abuse. Judge Williams continued, and her voice was getting harder with every word. The evidence presented shows a pattern of systematic harassment, public humiliation, and deliberate alienation. The defendant and her family spent months planning to psychologically traumatize Mr. Thompson, documented their plans in writing, filmed the execution of their plan, and then attempted to use that manufactured trauma as justification for denying him access to his child. Claire was crying now, but not the kind of sympathetic tears that might win over a judge. These were tears of panic, the kind that come when you realize your carefully constructed narrative is crumbling around you. Furthermore, Judge Williams continued, the defendant's refusal to list Mr. Thompson on the birth certificate, despite having no legitimate questions about paternity, demonstrates a deliberate attempt to weaponize their child against her father. This court will not tolerate children being used as pawns in adult conflicts. The gavel came down like thunder. I'm granting Mr. Thompson temporary sole custody, pending a full investigation. The defendant will be allowed supervised visitation twice per week, supervised by a court-appointed monitor. Mrs. Richardson. She turned to look directly at Marjorie, who was sitting there with her mouth hanging open like a fish gasping for air. You and the other family members documented in these messages are hereby barred from any contact with the minor child pending further review. Marjorie tried to stand up, probably to object or argue or demand to speak to the court's manager, but the bailiff was already moving toward her. Your Honor, you can't. Ma'am, I just did. And if you continue to disrupt my courtroom, you'll be held in contempt. Sarah was trying not to smile, but I could see the satisfaction in her eyes. We'd just won the first round, and we'd won it decisively. As we filed out of the courtroom, I could hear Marjorie behind me, her voice rising to a near shriek as she demanded that their lawyer do something about this travesty. Claire was still crying, but now Gerald was trying to comfort her while shooting apologetic looks in my direction. Derek was nowhere to be seen. Apparently, when the going got tough, the tough ran away to update their social media status. Outside the courthouse, Sarah finally let herself smile. That, she said, was even better than I expected. Judge Williams doesn't hand out temporary sole custody lightly. She saw exactly what we wanted her to see. A family that prioritizes control and manipulation over the welfare of a child. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely. My daughter was going to be safe. She was going to be with someone who actually loved her instead of seeing her as a weapon to be used against her father. But as satisfying as this victory was, I knew it was just the beginning. The Richardson family had just been publicly humiliated in a way that made their baby shower prank look like a gentle pat on the head. And people like that don't go quietly into the night. They were going to come back swinging, and I needed to be ready for whatever they threw at me next. You know what's funny about cornering a family of narcissists in a courtroom? They don't learn their lesson. They just get better at hiding their crazy. After Judge Williams handed me temporary sole custody and basically told the Richardson clan to take a long walk off a short pier, I figured they'd lick their wounds and maybe, just maybe, try to act like civilized human beings for once in their lives. Boy, was I wrong about that. The first sign that they weren't going quietly into that good night came exactly 48 hours after the hearing. I was sitting in my living room, finally getting to hold my daughter without worrying about someone trying to snatch her away, when my phone started buzzing with notifications. Not calls or texts, social media alerts. Lots of them. Apparently, while I'd been busy being a responsible father and setting up a nursery, Derek had been channeling his inner Bond villain and launching what can only be described as a digital warfare campaign designed to destroy what was left of my reputation. The guy had created not one, not two, but 5 different fake social media accounts, each with slightly different variations of my name and profile pictures that looked just similar enough to be confusing. David Thompson, Deadbeat Dad Exposed, was posting photos of random babies with captions like, "This is what I abandoned for my own selfish needs." Dave T. The Truth Revealed was sharing articles about fathers who walked out on their families, complete with commentary about how some men just can't handle real responsibility. And my personal favorite, D. Thompson Truth Teller, was posting what appeared to be fake text message screenshots showing me supposedly admitting to being unstable and unfit to be a father. The creativity was almost impressive if you could ignore the fact that it was completely psychotic. Derek had apparently spent the entire weekend after our court hearing crafting this elaborate alternate reality where I was some kind of monster who'd abandoned his pregnant wife and was now using the legal system to stalk and harass an innocent family. But the fake social media accounts were just the opening act. The real show started when people I actually knew began getting contacted by various Richardson family members, each with their own version of the truth about what had really happened. My coworker Janet called me on a Wednesday morning, sounding confused and a little concerned. "Hey, so I got this weird call yesterday from someone claiming to be your mother-in-law. She said you were having some kind of breakdown and that people needed to know the real story about what happened with Claire and the baby." Marjorie, apparently, had somehow gotten hold of my employee directory and was systematically calling everyone I worked with to share her version of events. According to her carefully crafted narrative, I was a controlling, abusive husband who'd had a psychotic break when confronted about my behavior at a family gathering. The court case wasn't about custody. It was about me using legal harassment to continue tormenting my innocent wife and her loving family. "She seemed really upset," Janet continued, "but also really concerned about you. She kept saying they just wanted to help you get the support you needed." The concerned family angle was brilliant, I had to admit. Instead of coming across as vindictive enemies, they were positioning themselves as caring relatives trying to stage an intervention for someone they loved, but who was clearly having mental health issues. It was manipulative gaslighting taken to an Olympic level. My neighbor Bob got a visit from Gerald himself, who showed up at his door one evening with what he claimed were court documents proving that I was an unfit father. The documents, of course, were carefully edited versions of our filing papers that made it look like the court had found against me instead of granting me custody. He seemed like a really nice guy, Bob told me later, clearly torn between wanting to believe his neighbor and the evidence he'd been shown. But he had all these official-looking papers, and he seemed really worried about you and the baby. The beauty of their strategy was its sophistication. This wasn't some amateur smear campaign run by angry people making obvious lies. This was a coordinated psychological operation designed to isolate me from my support network by making everyone I knew question my mental stability and moral character. Claire herself was playing the long-suffering wife role to perfection. She started showing up at places where she knew my friends and acquaintances would see her: the grocery store, the coffee shop near my office, the gym I used to attend. Always looking appropriately tragic, always with just a hint of visible sadness that suggested she was bravely carrying on despite some terrible trauma. My friend Mike from college ran into her at Starbucks and later called to ask if I was okay. "She didn't say much," he explained, "but she looked really shaken up, like someone who'd been through something awful. And when I mentioned your name, she just got this scared look in her eyes and said she couldn't talk about it. Couldn't talk about it. Like I was some kind of dangerous secret that was too traumatic to mention." The woman deserved an Academy Award for her performance. But the campaign that really got under my skin was the one targeting my professional reputation. Someone, and I had a pretty good idea who, had been leaving anonymous reviews on my company's website and various professional platforms, all following the same basic script. David Thompson is unstable and should not be trusted with important responsibilities. He has serious personal issues that affect his judgment and reliability. Nothing actionable, nothing specific enough to be clearly defamatory, but just enough to plant seeds of doubt in the minds of anyone who might be considering working with me or promoting me. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts, designed to slowly erode my career prospects without leaving any fingerprints. The really insidious part was how they'd weaponized my own documentation against me. Remember all those screenshots I'd taken of their group chat? Somehow, edited versions of those conversations had started circulating that made it look like I was the one planning harassment and manipulation. They'd taken messages out of context, rearranged timestamps, and created what appeared to be evidence that I'd been plotting against them all along. One particularly creative forgery showed what appeared to be messages from me talking about destroying Claire's family and making them pay for disrespecting me. Never mind that I'd never written anything like that. The screenshots looked legitimate enough to fool anyone who wasn't a digital forensics expert. But the harassment campaign reached its peak about 3 weeks after the court hearing, when things took a turn from annoying to genuinely frightening. I was walking through the park with my daughter, enjoying one of those perfect autumn days where the leaves are changing colors and the air has that crisp bite that makes you think about apple cider and Halloween decorations. That's when I noticed the black sedan. At first, I thought it was just paranoia. After weeks of dealing with fake social media accounts and whisper campaigns, I was probably seeing threats where none existed. But the car followed us through 3 different turns, always staying about 50 yards back, never quite close enough to be obvious, but never far enough away to be coincidental. When I got home, I found an envelope in my mailbox with no return address and no postmark. Inside was a single photograph, me and my daughter at the park, taken from a distance with what was obviously a telephoto lens. No words, no message, just proof that someone had been watching us, documenting our movements, and wanted me to know about it. The message was clear. We can get to you anytime we want. That night, after I'd put my daughter to bed and triple-checked all the locks on my doors, I sat down and really looked at what was happening. This wasn't just a family feud anymore. This wasn't even just a custody battle. This had escalated into a full-scale psychological warfare campaign designed to isolate me, discredit me, and ultimately drive me away from my daughter. But here's the thing about being systematically harassed by people who think they're smarter than you. They always get overconfident. They always push just a little too far, leave just one too many fingerprints, make just one mistake that gives you the opening you need to fight back. And Derek, bless his sociopathic little heart, was about to make that mistake. I started documenting everything. Every fake social media post, every suspicious phone call, every edited screenshot that magically appeared online. I installed security cameras around my house and started keeping a detailed log of everywhere I went with my daughter, just in case that black sedan showed up again. My lawyer Sarah was fascinated by the sophistication of their campaign. Most people who lose in court either give up or make really obvious, actionable threats, she told me during one of our meetings. This family is playing a much longer game. They're trying to destroy you slowly, make it look like you're having a breakdown, and then use your instability as grounds to get custody back. So what do we do about it? Sarah smiled, and it was the kind of smile that probably made opposing counsel very nervous. We let them keep digging their own grave. Every fake account they create, every lie they tell, every edited screenshot they produce is more evidence of their pattern of harassment. They think they're being clever, but they're actually building our case for us. She was right, of course. But in the meantime, I had to live with the constant stress of wondering what they'd try next, wondering if my daughter was safe, wondering if every friendly conversation with a neighbor or coworker would turn into another opportunity for them to spread their poison. The worst part wasn't even the harassment itself. It was the way it made me question everything. When someone spends weeks systematically trying to convince the world that you're unstable, you start wondering if maybe you really are losing your mind. When people you trust start looking at you with concern and asking if you're okay, you begin to doubt your own perception of reality. But every time I started to spiral, every time I caught myself wondering if maybe I was the problem, I'd look at my daughter sleeping peacefully in her crib and remember what this was really about. This wasn't about me or my hurt feelings or my wounded pride. This was about making sure she grew up in a world where love and truth mattered more than manipulation and control. And if that meant enduring a few more months of psychological warfare from a family of suburban sociopaths, well, bring it on. I'd been through worse than Derek's amateur hour intimidation campaign. But they weren't done yet. Not by a long shot. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places, like finding a $20 bill in an old coat pocket or discovering that the weird noise your car's been making is actually just a loose bolt instead of complete engine failure. In my case, salvation came in the form of an email from someone I'd never heard of, sent to an address that only a handful of people knew existed, containing information that would turn my entire understanding of the Richardson family upside down. It was a Thursday evening, about 6 weeks into their psychological warfare campaign, and I was doing what had become my nightly routine, documenting the latest round of harassment while my daughter slept peacefully in her bouncy seat next to my desk. Derek had outdone himself that day with a particularly creative fake social media post claiming I'd been spotted lurking outside Claire's apartment building, complete with a blurry photo that could have been anyone but looked suspicious enough to fuel the gossip mill. That's when my laptop chimed with a new email notification. The sender was listed as H. Morrison, legal, with a subject line that made me sit up straight. Regarding the Richardson family, information you need to see. My first instinct was to delete it. After weeks of dealing with fake accounts and manufactured evidence, I'd become paranoid about any communication that seemed too convenient or perfectly timed. But something about the email's professional tone and the specific way it referenced the Richardsons made me curious enough to open it. Mr. Thompson, it began, my name is Hannah Morrison, and I'm an attorney practicing family law in the Chicago area. I've been following your custody case through professional channels, and I believe I have information that could be relevant to your situation. I dated Claire Richardson approximately 6 years ago, before her relationship with you, and I have documented evidence of patterns of behavior by her family that may support your claims of harassment and manipulation. I read that paragraph 3 times before it really sank in. Claire had dated a woman 6 years ago. That in itself wasn't particularly shocking. People's sexual histories are their own business, but the fact that she'd never mentioned it was interesting. More interesting was the implication that this Hannah person had her own experiences with the Richardson family dynamic. The email continued. I understand this contact may seem strange, but I've been watching the public aspects of your case unfold, and I recognize the tactics being used against you. The Richardson family has a documented history of coordinated harassment campaigns against people they perceive as threats to their control or image. I was subjected to similar treatment when my relationship with Claire became serious enough to threaten their carefully constructed family narrative. Hannah included her bar number and law firm contact information, which I immediately looked up to verify. She was legitimate, a partner at a mid-sized family law firm with an excellent reputation and over 15 years of experience. This wasn't some random person with an axe to grind. This was a legal professional putting her credibility on the line to reach out to me. If you're interested in learning more, the email concluded, I'd be happy to meet in person to discuss what I experienced and share some documentation that might be helpful to your case. I have no personal stake in your situation, but I believe in holding people accountable for patterns of abusive behavior, regardless of their social standing. I stared at that email for about 10 minutes, weighing my options. On one hand, this could be another elaborate setup by the Richardson family, though I couldn't figure out how they'd benefit from introducing evidence of Claire's previous relationship. On the other hand, if this Hannah Morrison was legitimate, she might have insights into their family dynamics that could be invaluable for my case. I called Sarah, my lawyer, and read her the email. Her response was immediate and enthusiastic. Set up the meeting, she said without hesitation. If she's legit, and her credentials check out, this could be huge. Pattern evidence is incredibly powerful in family court cases. If we can show that they've done this before, it completely undermines their claim that you're the problem. 3 days later, I found myself sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Chicago, waiting to meet a woman who might hold the key to understanding exactly who I'd been dealing with for the past 3 years. Hannah Morrison turned out to be nothing like what I'd expected. She was probably in her early 40s, with graying brown hair and the kind of steady, competent presence that made you instantly trust her judgment. Thank you for agreeing to meet, she said as she sat down across from me. I know this whole situation must be incredibly overwhelming. We spent the first few minutes on small talk while I tried to figure out if this was really happening or if I'd somehow stumbled into an alternate reality where random lawyers appeared to offer help with my family drama. But as Hannah began to tell her story, I realized that my experience with the Richardsons wasn't unique. It was just the latest iteration of a pattern they'd been perfecting for years. I met Claire at a legal conference in 2018, Hannah explained. She was working as a paralegal then, and we hit it off immediately. She was smart, funny, and seemed genuinely interested in social justice issues. For the first few months, everything was great. But then Hannah met the family, and that's when things started to go sideways. Marjorie was polite but cold from the beginning, she continued. Not overtly hostile, just constantly making little comments that let me know. The real problems started when Claire and I began talking about moving in together, Hannah said. That's when Marjorie decided I was a genuine threat to her control over Claire's life, and the gloves came off. What followed was a months-long campaign of psychological warfare that made my recent experiences look like amateur hour. Phone calls to Hannah's employers suggesting she was unstable and unprofessional. Anonymous complaints filed with the State Bar Association questioning her fitness to practice law. Social media harassment campaigns targeting both her personal and professional reputation. They were more subtle about it than what they've done to you, Hannah admitted. No group chats or documented planning that I could find. But the pattern was unmistakable. Every area of my life was under attack simultaneously, and it all traced back to people connected to the Richardson family. The most damaging part of their campaign against Hannah had been their manipulation of Claire herself. Just like with me, they'd gradually convinced her that her partner was the source of all the family drama, that choosing her relationship meant choosing conflict over peace. Claire started pulling away, Hannah explained, her voice getting quieter. She'd make excuses for her family's behavior, say I was being too sensitive, suggest that maybe if I just tried harder to fit in, things would improve. Classic gaslighting. But at the time, I thought maybe she was right. The relationship ended when Hannah finally gave Claire an ultimatum. Choose her family's toxicity or choose a healthy relationship. Claire chose her family, and Hannah found herself shut out completely, just like she'd never existed. The harassment didn't stop immediately, Hannah continued. It took another 6 months before they were satisfied that I'd been completely neutralized as a threat. But once they moved on to other targets, I started documenting everything I could remember and preserve whatever evidence I still had access to. That's when she pulled out a folder that made my eyes widen. Bank records showing unusual financial transfers between Gerald and various shell companies. Email correspondence between Marjorie and people I didn't recognize, discussing reputation management and protective measures for the family. Most importantly, a series of documents that suggested Gerald had been involved in some seriously questionable financial dealings. Gerald Richardson isn't just a henpecked husband, Hannah said, sliding the folder across the table. He's been running a tax evasion scheme through his construction business for years. Underreporting income, paying workers under the table, creating fake expenses to reduce his tax liability. Marjorie has been helping him hide the money through various investment accounts and charitable donations that don't actually go to charity. I flipped through the documents, trying to process what I was seeing. Financial records that showed systematic fraud spanning at least 5 years. Email threads discussing how to move money without creating paper trails. Even receipts for cash payments to workers who were supposed to be independent contractors. How did you get all this? I asked. Hannah smiled grimly. Gerald made the mistake of asking me for legal advice about hypothetical tax issues while I was dating Claire. He thought he was being clever, getting free consultation from a lawyer without admitting to any wrongdoing. What he actually did was hand me evidence of multiple felonies. The implications were staggering. The Richardson family wasn't just a bunch of suburban bullies. They were criminals. Their harassment campaigns weren't just about control and manipulation. They were about protecting a financial empire built on fraud and tax evasion. Why are you sharing this with me? I asked. Because they tried to destroy my life, Hannah said simply. And because I've been waiting for the right opportunity to hold them accountable. Your case gives me that opportunity. She explained that my custody battle had created the perfect opening to introduce evidence about their pattern of harassment without it looking like a vindictive ex seeking revenge. A family court judge who was already concerned about their treatment of me would be very interested to learn about their history of coordinating attacks against anyone who threatened their control. More importantly, Hannah continued, if Gerald's financial crimes become public knowledge, it undermines their entire image as a respectable suburban family. It's hard to claim moral authority when you're facing federal tax evasion charges. We spent another 2 hours going through the documents, with Hannah explaining the significance of each piece of evidence and how it connected to the larger pattern of Richardson family behavior. By the time we parted ways, I had copies of everything and a much clearer understanding of exactly who I'd been dealing with. These weren't just narcissistic in-laws who didn't like me. These were sophisticated criminals who'd built their entire lifestyle on fraud and manipulation, and who would destroy anyone who threatened to expose their secrets. But now I knew their secrets. And more importantly, I had someone with the legal expertise and personal motivation to help me use those secrets against them. The war was about to escalate in ways they never saw coming. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I was the one holding the cards that could bring down their entire house of lies. Hannah Morrison had just handed me the ammunition I needed to end this fight once and for all. You know that feeling when you're playing chess against someone who thinks they're a grandmaster, and then you realize you've been setting up checkmate for the last 10 moves while they were busy admiring their own pawns? That's exactly what it felt like when I walked into Sarah's office the Monday after meeting Hannah, carrying a folder full of financial documents that were about to turn the Richardson family's perfect suburban kingdom into a smoking crater. Sarah took one look at the evidence Hannah had provided and actually started laughing. Not the polite, professional chuckle I was used to from her, but full-blown, tear-inducing laughter that made me wonder if she'd finally snapped under the pressure of dealing with my insane in-laws. "This is beautiful," she said, wiping her eyes as she flipped through Gerald's financial records. "They've been so focused on their little harassment campaign against you that they forgot they were sitting on a mountain of federal crimes. It's like watching bank robbers argue about who gets to drive the getaway car while the FBI surrounds the building." The first domino fell exactly 1 week later. Derek, apparently still drunk on his own cleverness, had been escalating his social media harassment campaign to the point where it crossed the line from annoying to legally actionable. His latest masterpiece was a Facebook post featuring a photo of me and my daughter at a playground, with a caption suggesting I was stalking innocent families and displaying concerning behavior around children. The problem with Derek's amateur hour detective work was that he'd gotten sloppy. The metadata on the photo showed it had been taken with his specific phone model, and the timestamp proved he'd been following us around town to get the shot. Even better, his IP address was all over the fake social media accounts he'd been using to spread lies about me. Sarah filed defamation charges against him on a Tuesday morning, complete with a detailed timeline of his harassment campaign and enough digital evidence to sink a battleship. The really beautiful part was how we'd structured the lawsuit. Derek worked for a large corporation with a strict social media policy and zero tolerance for employees who engaged in harassment or stalking behavior. His employer suspended him before lunch on Wednesday. By Friday, he was fired entirely, with HR citing violation of company harassment policies and behavior detrimental to workplace environment. Turns out that when you spend months creating fake social media accounts to stalk and defame someone, it tends to reflect poorly on your judgment and professionalism. But Derek's downfall was just the appetizer. The main course was Marjorie's desperate attempt to insert herself back into my daughter's life through the court system. Apparently convinced that she could manipulate another judge the way she'd been manipulating everyone else for years, she filed for emergency grandparental visitation rights, claiming she had a special bond with the baby and that my behavior was creating an unsafe environment. Her petition was a masterpiece of manufactured victimhood. According to Marjorie's version of reality, she was just a loving grandmother being cruelly separated from her precious granddaughter by a vindictive son-in-law who was using the court system to exact revenge for minor family disagreements. She painted herself as this tragic figure, a devoted family matriarch whose only crime was caring too much about her daughter and grandchild. The emergency hearing was scheduled for the following Monday, which gave us just enough time to prepare what Sarah cheerfully called the nuclear option. We walked into that courtroom armed with every piece of evidence we'd been collecting. The group chat screenshots, Derek's harassment campaign, witness statements about their coordinated lies, and most importantly, Hannah's documentation of their pattern of targeting anyone who threatened their control. Marjorie showed up dressed like she was attending a charity luncheon, complete with pearls and the kind of conservative dress that screamed respectable grandmother. She'd even brought backup in the form of several church friends who were prepared to testify about what a wonderful, caring person she was. Judge Williams took one look at our evidence folder, and you could see her expression shift from professional courtesy to barely contained disgust. Sarah methodically laid out the timeline of harassment, starting with the baby shower ambush and continuing through Derek's stalking campaign and the systematic lies they've been spreading about my mental health and parental fitness. But the real knockout punch came when we introduced the evidence of their harassment campaign against Hannah Morrison. Judge Williams' eyebrows went up when Sarah explained that this wasn't the first time the Richardson family had coordinated attacks against someone who threatened their control. "Your Honor," Sarah said, "the petitioner claims to be a loving grandmother who simply wants access to her grandchild. The evidence shows she's actually the ringleader of a family that systematically destroys anyone who doesn't submit to their control. Ms. Morrison's experience demonstrates this is a pattern of behavior, not an isolated incident." Marjorie's lawyer tried to object, claiming Hannah's testimony was irrelevant to the current case, but Judge Williams shut him down immediately. "Counselor, if the petitioner has a history of engaging in harassment campaigns against people involved with her daughter, that's absolutely relevant to her fitness as a caregiver and her true motivations for seeking access to this child." When Marjorie finally took the witness stand, it was like watching a master manipulator meet her match. Judge Williams asked pointed questions about the group chat messages, the coordinated harassment campaign, and her role in planning my public humiliation. Every time Marjorie tried to deflect or minimize her actions, the judge would reference specific evidence that contradicted her testimony. "Mrs. Richardson, you claim you want what's best for this child, yet you spent months planning to humiliate her father and then followed up with a campaign to isolate him from his support network. Explain to me how that serves the child's best interests." Marjorie's performance cracked like a cheap facade. Her voice got higher, her answers more defensive, her carefully constructed image of the loving grandmother dissolving under the weight of documented evidence. The hearing lasted less than 2 hours. Judge Williams dismissed Marjorie's petition immediately, extending the restraining order to include any attempts at indirect contact through third parties, and added a stern warning about the consequences of continued harassment. "Mrs. Richardson, your petition is denied, and frankly, I find your claims of love and concern for this child to be contradicted by your documented behavior toward her father. This court will not reward manipulation and harassment with access to children." Meanwhile, Gerald's financial house of cards was starting to collapse in spectacular fashion. Hannah had been busy sharing his tax evasion evidence with the appropriate federal authorities, and the IRS had launched a full audit of his construction business. Bank accounts were being frozen, records subpoenaed, and what had once been a comfortable suburban lifestyle was rapidly becoming a legal nightmare that would make their family drama look like a playground squabble. Claire, caught between her family's imploding criminal enterprise and her own legal troubles, finally started to crack. For the first time since this whole mess began, she reached out directly, not through lawyers or family members, but a simple text message that read, "We need to talk." After months of warfare, the Richardson fortress was finally crumbling, and the people who'd spent so much energy trying to destroy me were discovering what happens when you build your entire life on lies and manipulation. The end game was finally approaching, and I was the one holding all the cards. The final custody hearing arrived like the last scene of a movie where you already know the good guy wins, but you still want to watch the villain get what's coming to them. Claire walked into that courtroom looking like she'd aged 5 years in the past 6 months, her designer clothes replaced with something modest and apologetic, her usual confidence nowhere to be found. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, she came alone. No Marjorie sitting in the back row like some kind of suburban mob boss. No Derek filming for social media content. No Gerald hiding behind his newspaper. Just Claire, her lawyer, and the weight of everything they'd put in motion finally crushing down on her shoulders. "Your Honor," she said when given the chance to speak, "I want to apologize for everything that's happened. I realize now that my family and I made terrible mistakes, and I just want to be a good mother to my daughter." Too little, too late. Judge Williams had 2 thick binders sitting in front of her, and she opened them like she was unveiling evidence at a war crimes tribunal. "Ms. Richardson," the judge said, "I have here documentation of a conspiracy that spans several months, involving multiple family members, designed to psychologically torment the father of your child. I have evidence of harassment campaigns, defamation, stalking, and now federal financial crimes that suggest your family operates like an organized criminal enterprise." Claire's lawyer tried to argue that she'd been manipulated by her family, that she was as much a victim as anyone else. But Judge Williams wasn't buying it. The evidence shows Ms. Richardson was an active, willing participant in planning and executing this harassment campaign. The group chat messages clearly demonstrate her enthusiasm for her husband's planned humiliation. This court does not reward calculated cruelty with parental rights. The gavel came down like thunder. Supervised visitation extended for 2 years. Marjorie and Derek permanently barred from any contact with my daughter. Gerald's financial crimes referred to federal prosecutors. That night, I posted a single statement on social media. For everyone who laughed at my baby shower, this is what happens when you try to corner a father who fights back. Attached was a photo of the court order granting me primary custody. The silence that followed was deafening. No angry phone calls, no social media retaliation, no desperate attempts at damage control. Just the sound of a family that had built their entire identity on manipulation and control finally realizing they'd met someone who wouldn't be broken. A week later, Marjorie sent an email begging for forgiveness, claiming she'd just been trying to protect her family and didn't understand how things had gotten so out of hand. I read it once and deleted it without responding. I changed my daughter's last name to mine, sold the house that held too many toxic memories, and moved to a new city where nobody knew our story. Where my daughter could grow up without the shadow of people who'd tried to use her as a weapon against her father. She's 3 now, smart and funny, and completely unaware that there are people in the world who spent months plotting to keep us apart. Sometimes she asks about her mother, and I tell her age-appropriate truths, that some adults make bad choices, but that doesn't change how much her daddy loves her. One day, when she's older, I'll tell her the whole story. But for now, she only needs to know this: her father stayed. He fought for her. And the people who tried to take her away learned that love is stronger than manipulation. Truth is more powerful than lies. And sometimes the good guys really do win. The Richardsons are gone, left with nothing but their shame and their legal bills. We're free, we're happy, and we're exactly where we belong.